This is a presentation of Michigan State University's Knight Center for Environmental Journalism.
Hi, I'm Jamal Spencer. Welcome to Environment. In 1859, the campus of MSU was under siege. Every member of the first graduating class and all but one professor were suffering from malaria, a disease carried by mosquitoes. For most of the next century, malaria plagued the world. By the 1940s, DDT had become one of the solutions. Today, the insecticide symbolizes how a solution can become a problem Rachel Carson helped solve. May 27th marks the celebration of Rachel Carson's 100th birthday. Her landmark book, Silent Spring, is a milestone that launched the environmental movement. One of the main characters in Silent Spring was MSU scientist Dr. George J. Wallace. Tonight, MSU's Knight Center for Environmental Journalism presents a little-known story about a man whose reputation was nearly destroyed by his unyielding devotion to science and nature. Please join us now for Dying to be Heard.
Michigan State's campus. The summer's leaves are beginning to turn, and the warm afternoons are beginning to cool. It's time again. A new fall semester is about to begin. As evening comes, the songbirds twitter as they dart to and fro, fluttering to find a roost for the night. The tolling of the old clock on Beaumont Tower is marking the end of another day. But if that clock could magically take us back about 50 years, we might notice that change was in the air. It's the 1950s. It's springtime. Many of Michigan State's small songbirds are going about their familiar tasks, little knowing that for many, their lives would soon be over. Something was wrong. A number of dead and dying birds were being found littering the campus. Most were robins. At first it was just a few, but soon the few became too many to be ignored. One person who noticed was a man with a passion. His name was George J. Wallace, a PhD in ornithology, and as the days passed, Dr. Wallace watched. What he saw was what he loved dying away, and he wanted to know why. Dr. Richard Snyder, then a student, remembers.
It was recognized that there was a problem on campus with birds dying, and the source hadn't been quite pointed to. There had been some publications in about 1955 that had a link between pesticides and perhaps the robins. And Dr. Wallace latched on to that concept and that information, essentially, and began saying, there's something wrong here. Well, yes, there was something wrong.
What had happened then is now a distant memory. But some bits and pieces of that memory still exist here in the collections of MSU's museum. It's been over 50 years since these robins were collected on and around campus. But even today, as they rest quietly in the vaults of the museum, their silence speaks volumes. Even today, half a century later, they have to be handled with protective gloves. And even today, these few are a stark reminder of a dark installment in humankind's quest for power over nature. These are the few left over from the hundreds that were collected, labeled, and studied. These small birds are a part of history, a part that many say was significant to the early advance of the environmental movement. Today, even though the man and his birds have passed on, their legacies will be remembered. Dr. Wallace taught in the Department of Zoology at what was then known as Michigan State College. He was a scientist. He was a teacher. He was a man who many say loved bringing knowledge and understanding to his students, and through their work together, to the world. These birds were Dr. Wallace's passion. An ornithologist by choice, Dr. Wallace and his students' research into how these robins died would ultimately be cited in Rachel Carson's most celebrated work, Silent Spring.
But she picked up on George's publications about DDT and birds, and that's all it took. This became a popular topic. And as the controversy grew, she knew, the reporter mind in her knew she had a story. And she also recognized we had a problem. And she wanted to bring the problem to the great American public and say, look, in your own backyard, carelessness can lead to death and destruction.
But even with that recognition, Dr. Wallace and his work mostly remained overlooked. Michigan State's Dr. Jim Bingen recalls his surprise.
And when I came across his name and the extensive discussion of Wallace in that chapter, I thought it should be fairly easy for me to sort of type in George Wallace in our own library search and find any number of publications or at least references, and came up with very, very few, which I found quite surprising.
After his death, Dr. Wallace and his work faded from official memory. Part of a forgotten chapter that has rested silently along with the rest of the collateral damage. Damage from a forgotten war. It was a war against nature. Originally in the 1940s, the major battle was to kill the mosquitoes that were killing us.
And MSU was no different. MSU spread these pesticides on the campus knowingly to knock down mosquito populations. I often wondered why we didn't have mosquito problems here in this swamp in the summertime, because MSU, after all, is built on an old swamp, and we have a lot of standing water. We have some old woodlots that have standing water, and every spring, if you just drive down Farm Lane, out there by Baker Woodlot, you'll see the little ponds on the edge, the vernal ponds on the edge of the woodlot that I collected in when I was 17 years old. And at the time that all of this was coming down, we were putting pesticides in those little ponds to kill the mosquito larvae. And so we used DDT. And I say we, I say MSU.
But after World War II was over, the battle plans changed. There was a new enemy on the horizon. And the wonder weapon was DDT. They are called elm bark beetles, and they come in two varieties, the European elm bark beetle and the native elm bark beetle. They carry the Dutch elm disease fungus that accumulates on their bodies as they move from infected breeding sites, usually rotting dead trees rich in fungal spores, to healthy living trees to feed and lay eggs. Throughout the country, millions of these magnificent trees have succumbed to the ravages of this disease, and in the 1950s, the elm trees on Michigan State's campus were in jeopardy. The university declared war.
All of a sudden, to see these magnificent trees begin to dwindle and die one by one, something had to be done. And DDT was used in dosages to knock down the beetle